A man brought his cat in for a routine check a few months back, entirely convinced there was nothing whatsoever wrong with her. 14 years old, still eating well, still purring contentedly on the sofa most evenings without any obvious complaint. He mentioned it almost as a passing aside on his way out the door that she had apparently been drinking noticeably more water than usual lately. Practically living at the water bowl these days, he said, and laughed it off lightly. Blood work run that very same afternoon showed kidney values sitting well into the genuinely dangerous range. She had been genuinely sick for months, quite possibly considerably longer than that, and the only outward sign anybody in the household had actually noticed the whole time was a water bowl that quietly needed refilling more often than it used to. That is the thing about older cats that took me a long time in this profession to properly appreciate. They do not announce illness the way a young, robust animal sometimes does. They compensate quietly for as long as their body physically allows, and by the time something looks obviously and clearly wrong, it has usually been building quietly for weeks or months underneath a surface that still looked mostly fine. My name is Leon. I have spent close to 30 years in general small animal practice, and these days, mostly by choice, I see a great many cats over the age of 10. I want to walk you slowly through 11 things owners very commonly dismiss as simply what old age looks like, that are far more often than people expect. A cat quietly telling you something is genuinely wrong. Here is the pattern behind almost everything on this list. A cat's entire evolutionary history runs on hiding weakness, because in the wild, a visibly unwell animal is the one a predator takes first. And that instinct never switches off just because the cat now lives on a sofa. So the signs that actually show up are subtle, easy to explain away, and almost always framed by an owner as some harmless quirk of getting older rather than what they usually are, which is a body working hard to compensate for something underneath. I want to be clear about something before the list itself. None of what follows means panic every time you notice one of these things. Cats do genuinely slow down with age, the same as any of us. What I am asking you to do is watch for a change from that individual cat's own normal, held over a few weeks rather than judged in a single afternoon, because a change from baseline is almost always more useful information than comparing your cat to some idea of what a cat in general should be doing at a certain age. Number 1. Drinking noticeably more water. This is the story I opened with, and it is one of the most common early signs of both kidney disease and diabetes in senior cats, two of the conditions I diagnose most often in this age group. Owners notice it, often for months, and reframe it as the cat simply liking the water bowl more than it used to. Track it properly. If you are refilling the bowl meaningfully more often over a couple of weeks, that is worth a blood and urine check, not a shrug. Kidney disease in particular is manageable for a genuinely long time when caught early, with real quality of life for years afterward, but the window for that easier management narrows the longer it goes unnoticed. Number 2. Losing weight while eating the same amount, or even more. This combination specifically, weight loss alongside a normal or increased appetite, is one of the clearest signs of an overactive thyroid, extremely common in cats over 10. Owners often see the healthy appetite and conclude everything must be fine, when the weight loss underneath it is the actual signal that something has gone wrong with how that food is being used. An overactive thyroid effectively puts the whole metabolism into overdrive, burning through calories faster than even an increased appetite can keep pace with. And it is one of the most treatable conditions on this entire list once it is properly identified. Number 3. Bad breath alongside eating less enthusiastically. Dental disease is enormously common in senior cats, and it is genuinely painful, not merely unpleasant to be near. A cat that used to attack its bowl and now approaches it more slowly or chews carefully on one side is very often dealing with a sore tooth. It has no way of describing to you directly. I see dental disease treated as a low priority far too often, purely because a cat with a genuinely painful mouth will still eat rather than starve, which owners take as reassurance that the discomfort cannot be that serious. Number 4. Reluctance to jump onto the bed or up onto the counter. This gets dismissed constantly as simply slowing down with age, and sometimes that is genuinely all it is. But arthritis is extremely common in older cats, more common than most owners realize because cats mask joint pain exceptionally well, and a cat that has quietly stopped jumping is very often managing real, chronic discomfort rather than simply choosing a calmer lifestyle. Watch specifically for a cat that pauses and visibly gathers itself before attempting a jump it used to make entirely without thinking, or that now uses a chair as a deliberate stepping stone toward a surface it once reached comfortably in a single clean movement. Number 5. Changes in the litter tray, going beside it rather than in it, or straining. A cat going just outside the tray is very often not being difficult. Painful joints can make the physical act of climbing into a tray with high sides genuinely uncomfortable, and straining without much output, particularly in a male cat, is a genuine emergency that needs same-day attention rather than a wait-and-see approach. Since a blocked urinary tract in a male cat can become life-threatening within as little as a day if it goes unaddressed. Consider also whether the tray itself has become part of the problem. A high-sided tray that was perfectly manageable at 6 years old can become a genuine obstacle course for the same cat at 14, and switching to a lower-sided tray solves more of this issue than people expect. Number 6. Increased vocalizing, especially at night. Older cats crying at odd hours often get labeled as simply demanding more attention as they age. In reality, this is frequently linked to high blood pressure, an overactive thyroid, or early cognitive changes that cause genuine disorientation and real distress once the whole house has finally gone quiet and dark for the night. It is worth mentioning to your vet specifically because it often gets waved away as behavioral when there is something physical underneath it. High blood pressure in particular is worth raising directly since it is straightforward to check and treat once identified, yet it rarely gets tested for unless an owner or vet specifically thinks to look. Number 7. Hiding more than usual. A cat that starts spending far more time under the bed or behind furniture is not simply becoming more independent with age. Hiding is one of the oldest, most reliable signs of pain or illness in this species, precisely because it is instinctive rather than a conscious choice, and it deserves real attention rather than being read as a cat that has just become a bit more private lately. The change is often gradual enough that owners only notice it in hindsight, once a vet asks directly how much time the cat has been spending out of sight over the last month or two. Number 8. A coat that has become greasy, matted, or unevenly groomed. Cats in real discomfort groom less, and the parts they cannot comfortably reach, particularly around the hips and lower back in an arthritic cat, are often the first areas to look neglected. A previously fastidious cat that has let its coat slide is telling you something is making that daily grooming routine genuinely difficult now. Run a hand gently down the length of the spine and over the hips. Matting concentrated specifically in those harder-to-reach areas is a strong clue that arthritis, not simple laziness, is the underlying reason. Number 9. Vomiting more than the occasional hairball. Owners of long-haired cats especially tend to write off regular vomiting as simply a hairball problem. Frequent vomiting in a senior cat is more often linked to kidney disease, inflammatory bowel disease, or thyroid problems, and it is worth tracking honestly rather than assuming every episode has the same harmless explanation as the last one. A rough guide worth remembering is that more than once or twice a month in a cat that is not actively shedding heavily deserves a proper conversation rather than another bag of hairball control treats. Number 10. Disorientation, staring at walls, or forgetting where the litter tray is in a house they have lived in for years. This is one of the harder signs to watch because it genuinely can look like simple confusion of old age. Feline cognitive dysfunction is real, increasingly well recognized, and while it cannot always be reversed, there is real, meaningful support available if it is caught and named rather than dismissed as a cat that has simply gotten forgetful. Environmental changes as simple as consistent lighting at night and keeping furniture in familiar positions can meaningfully reduce the disorientation these cats experience. And that is worth knowing before assuming nothing can be done. Number 11. Seeking out unusually warm spots or a change in favorite sleeping locations. A senior cat suddenly obsessed with sitting directly on a radiator or abandoning a longtime favorite spot for somewhere warmer and lower to the ground is very often struggling to regulate its own body temperature, which links back to several of the conditions already mentioned on this list. It is a small, easy-to-miss detail that is worth noticing rather than simply enjoying as a cute new habit. If a cat that has never shown much interest in the radiator suddenly claims it as a permanent spot through a season that is not particularly cold, mention it at the next appointment even if nothing else on this list seems to fit yet. Now, a few things worth doing this week because a list like this only helps if it changes what you actually watch for. Start tracking water and food genuinely, not from memory. A simple note on the fridge of roughly how much goes into the bowl each day, checked for a fortnight, will tell you more about a slow, creeping change than trying to recall it from feel alone months later when a vet finally asks. Watch how your cat gets onto anything raised, the bed, the counter, a favorite chair. A confident, fluid jump looks completely different from a careful climb using furniture as a series of steps, and that difference is often the earliest visible sign of arthritis, well before any obvious limping ever appears. Weigh your cat monthly if you possibly can. A kitchen scale with the cat in a carrier, weighed together and then the carrier weighed alone afterward, works perfectly well and costs nothing. A written weight trend over months is worth more to me in an appointment than almost anything else you could bring in, because a scale catches a slow, gradual loss long before it becomes visible to the eye, and by the time weight loss is obvious just by looking, a meaningful amount of muscle and condition has usually already gone. And take hiding seriously. If a normally social cat has started disappearing for long stretches during the day, that is worth a conversation with your vet, even if nothing else on this list seems to apply yet. Keep a simple written log rather than trusting memory alone. A page on the fridge or a note in your phone, updated once a week, covering water intake, appetite, litter tray habits, and general mood, takes barely 2 minutes and turns vague impressions into something a vet can actually work with at an appointment. I cannot count the number of times a genuinely useful pattern only became visible once an owner had written it down over several weeks, rather than trying to recall it from feel alone under time pressure in a consultation room. Book a proper senior wellness check every 6 months rather than waiting for something to look obviously wrong. Blood work at that frequency catches conditions like kidney disease and an overactive thyroid at a stage where management is still straightforward, often years before any of the 11 signs on this list would have become obvious enough to notice on their own. I want to say something plainly before I finish, because I think it matters more than any single item on this list. None of this is about catching every subtle change perfectly. It is about treating small, boring changes as information rather than simply as the inevitable furniture of getting older. Cats do not get a diagnosis handed to them cleanly. They get quietly worse until somebody notices, and the sooner that somebody is you, the better every single outcome tends to be. And very often the cheaper it is too, because catching a problem early is reliably less expensive than treating an emergency it was allowed to become. 30 years in this profession has taught me that the owners whose senior cats do best are almost never the ones with the most dramatic interventions on record. They are the ones who paid quiet, consistent attention over years, who mentioned the small odd thing at the next routine visit instead of waiting to see if it resolved on its own, and who treated a slow change in behavior as worth a phone call, rather than something to simply monitor indefinitely from the sofa. That kind of attention costs nothing, and it is, in my honest experience, the single biggest factor in how comfortably a cat ages, far more than any product or supplement I could sell you. It is also worth saying that none of this is about becoming anxious over every small shift in your cat's routine. Cats have good days and quiet days the same as anyone, and a single afternoon of extra sleeping or a missed meal after a stressful visitor is rarely meaningful on its own. What matters is the pattern held over weeks, not the single data point, and that distinction is exactly why a written log, kept honestly over weeks rather than relied on from memory, matters so much more than even the sharpest recollection under time pressure in an appointment. I've written all of this into a proper guide, covering what a normal senior cat exam should actually include, a monthly weight log you can print and use immediately, and a clearer breakdown of what genuinely counts as aging against what is worth investigating properly. It also covers what typical blood work and imaging actually cost, laid out plainly so you can walk into an appointment already knowing roughly what to expect rather than being surprised at the desk afterward, which I know is often as much a barrier to acting early as uncertainty about the symptoms themselves. It is linked below, and it exists because 5 minutes in an appointment room is never quite long enough to cover everything that 30 years in this profession has taught me to watch for. If you take one thing from this video, it is this. Go and watch your cat get onto the sofa tonight. Properly watch, rather than simply notice it happened. That single habit, repeated regularly over the coming weeks and months, catches more real problems earlier than almost anything else I could tell you to do. And it costs you nothing but a few extra seconds of attention you were already giving your cat anyway.